Thank you, everyone. Welcome to our expert briefings series. I'm Conrad, one of the co-chairs of PyData Global 2021. We're very happy today to have a great panel to come talk to us about how you can benefit by contributing to open source. We have Leah, the Executive Director of NumFOCUS, Katrina, Director of NumFOCUS, James, Director of NumFOCUS, and Ian, who's a longtime NumFOCUS and PyData collaborator and co-founder of PyData 11. So please, if you guys would like to kick it off.
So I think maybe a good way to start would be to have our panel contributors just briefly introduce themselves, what their relationship with NumFOCUS is, and since this is an expert briefing, perhaps some of the expertise that they may bring to this session. From there, I'll hand it over to Ian, who will lay out a couple of the questions which I think that we wanted to go through, and at the same time, we'll open it up to the audience for the audience's questions. Given the audience that I see, we'll hold off on asking the participants in this session to introduce themselves, but if you want to ask a question, as part of your question, it would be very helpful to know a little bit more about you. And so if you can wait to introduce yourself until that. So I'll start it with myself, then we'll go to Katrina, then Ian, then Leah for the panel introductions. My name is James Powell. I serve as the chair of the NumFOCUS Board of Directors. I've sat in this role for 3 years, and so some of the expertise that I bring is in terms of understanding how NumFOCUS works from the board level. I've also served as vice president of PyData for, I think, 6 or 7 years now. And so I can talk a little bit to how PyData as a community effort integrates with the open source community as a whole and NumFOCUS's goals. And finally, for work, I do a lot of corporate training on open source tools. And so I can speak a little bit to how organizations think about open source from the perspective of integrating it further into their work. Katrina?
Yes, hi, my name is Katrina Reel. I've been on the board of directors for NumFOCUS for the last 3 years. Up until recently, I was the treasurer of NumFOCUS. I recently stepped into the president position, so I'm very happy to talk about any of the issues coming up in NumFOCUS. As far as my history with PyData, I've been a long-time open source contributor a long time ago before I moved into more of a community organizer and fundraising position. For my day job, I am director of data science at Cloudflare. I run a small team over there, and I can also speak about corporate responsibility as well as participation in open source communities from a corporate perspective.
Thank you, Katrina. So hello, everyone. My name is Ian Oswald. I ran one of the expert briefings earlier today on high performance Python. For this setting, I've been involved in PyData for over 8 years now. I'm one of the co-founders of PyData London, which is one of the largest, I think the largest PyData community on the planet, and with 11,000 members, at least pre-pandemic, when we could meet up every month with a couple of hundred people turning up, and our annual conference, which would contribute funding to NumFOCUS, which Leah can touch on shortly, I think. In my professional career, I work with companies on a strategic basis, helping teams deliver things of value, which includes the question of, hey, how do we use open source to most effect, and why should we get involved in the open source community? And I teach, and during teaching, I try to remind all of my students, particularly people in financial services, hey, you're using software from the open source community rather than just consume. It's nice to contribute back, and here are some arguments as to why you might want to get involved. And often I'm met with blank faces, people not realizing that this is a community they can get involved with rather than just consuming from. And so I'm looking forward to getting a bit of discussion here for those of you who want to get involved individually or also get involved professionally with your company and help take the company on that journey. That's me. Over to you, Leah.
Thanks, Ian. My name is Leah Silent. I'm the, as Conrad said, Executive Director of NumFOCUS. I have been with NumFOCUS from its beginning in early 2012 and have helped with various boards as the boards have changed throughout the years to be able to implement our programs, our fiscal sponsorship program, which we now have 45 projects, our educational initiatives, which include our events, our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives as well, and just working with projects, working with their user communities, both on academic research and enterprise levels as well.
Thank you, Leah. James, did you want to step in?
No, please, Ian, I know you had some initial questions to get started. For those of you who just joined us in this session, this is an open session with some of your questions. Ian's going to just kick things off with a couple of planted questions. If you want to jump on audio and jump on video and ask a question or engage in the discussion, feel free to do that. As part of that, if you could just let us know what your name is and give us just a very brief bio so we can understand the perspective that you're bringing as part of your question. But let's get things started with Ian. Ian, you had some initial questions.
Thanks, James. For Leah and Katrina, a lot of people attending the PyData conferences over the years turn up for the conference. They get to hear great talks. They get to meet people who are passionate about their work, and they know that they're involved in the community. And then there's this PyData thing that wraps it all up, and it's NumFOCUS thing by the stand that's present. But many people don't know about the NumFOCUS relationship to PyData, where the money goes, why there is money in this ecosystem behind open source. Because hey, everyone works for free in their evenings, and surely it's all done unpaid. And many people are just ignorant about the financial side of and the legal side of this. Could one of you say a couple of words around the relationship between PyData, NumFOCUS, and the financial support around open source, just to set the scene?
I think Leah and I can answer that question. PyData, I believe, started off with two goals. One, to help foster a community of users, and two, to serve as a fundraising for NumFOCUS. Leah can speak a little bit more to what nonprofit finances look like, but generally there's an idea of restricted versus unrestricted finances, money which is dedicated to a particular purpose, like particular changes to projects, or money which can be used across projects for open purposes. PyData serves as one of the larger sources of open unrestricted financing. And so it's PyData which goes to supporting a lot of the efforts that are not specifically related to one development goal for one specific project, but across many different projects across the ecosystem. And Leah, if you want to add some.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's important for those who are involved in PyData and PyData events and who purchase tickets to those events to know that that support is going directly to help NumFOCUS continue to provide critical services to projects. That we work with projects to make sure they have funding coming in from additional sources. NumFOCUS does not fund all the projects, but what we do is make sure that when projects get funding, that funding is able to be allocated where it needs to go to pay for development time, to pay for operational support and the infrastructure that these projects have to have. If they get a large grant, they have to have foundational support to be able to manage that grant. And that is the work we do. And I can talk more about that and go into detail the cost of providing that, but it's not insignificant. And so NumFOCUS, almost 90% of all of our costs are put back in programming for projects and making sure that the projects that we all know, use, and love are sustainable.
And I think, Katrina, you can also speak to a stat that we've batted around in the board, which is that for a very large grant, the administration costs for that grant are often greater than what we can take from the grant itself. And so things like PyData help to support our administration of other monies that come in through NumFOCUS. Katrina?
Yeah, absolutely. The administrative costs for sure are much lower when they're coming through the NumFOCUS organization. If any of y'all have ever worked with academic organizations or some other, grant handlers, basically, sometimes they can take upwards of 50% of the money that's coming in. As Leah just mentioned, 90% of our funds are coming straight into the project. So we're taking a much smaller cut, first off. And then second off, like I said, we were talking about the earmarked funds are going straight to projects, being able to go straight into, that ecosystem. But then the unrestricted funds help us, start support newer projects. We are able to give small development grants out to smaller projects and also help them grow. And then on top of that, I just want to mention that the PyData events for sure help subsidize this cost, right? So there truly is a a commitment to making sure that the projects are well funded. The PyData events, for sure, all of the money that's coming in, you know, we take a very small cost, provide really good content, and then use that money in order to subsidize all of these financial initiatives for the organization and the projects associated with them.
Okay, thank you very much.
So thank you to all of you.
Well, certainly, yes, thanks for everyone who pays for a ticket and donates in any form, because the financial support, as you make clear, is much more efficiently served back to the underlying projects. And the bit that's often not talked about is the alternative is, hey, nobody takes any cuts and the open source maintainers take the money themselves. But then, of course, they've got to spend late nights doing the accounting and running the legal side and the accounting side, which is no fun. Typically, you do that outside of your paid employment, and that takes a lot of time and responsibility to get right. So, of course, we need bodies like NumFOCUS who administer this and take away some of these pains and provide some things like legal representation for trademarks and brands and protection and guidance, the same as we get with the Python Software Foundation.
Ian, if I may harp on one small item that you mentioned. A nonprofit is not about excusing yourself from anything that is commercial, excusing yourself from anything that is monetarily or financially related. It's about changing the goal, the end goal of what this is all about, whether it is about creating profit for shareholders as part of some capitalist system, or whether it's about benefiting a particular cause. And so there is quite a bit of money involved in an organization like NumFOCUS. People still have to eat, people still need to pay their rent. But one of the things that distinguishes it as a community-driven foundation is this money goes to serve the underlying goal of open source scientific computing software, and to do this in a fashion that benefits the broad public as a whole. And so the direction of the projects and the open governance of the projects is a critical portion of this. Panda's goal is not to make any one organization successful. Its goal is to provide a high-quality tool for any organization for a core set of users. And so unlike, say, open source that comes out of a corporate organization, where they're doing that as a benefit to the world, to see the code, to maybe interact with it, they're missing the governance part, where the long-term sustainability, the long-term direction that the code takes is one that is still for the benefit of the organization, as opposed to one that's for the benefit of the end users of that tool.
Thank you, James. I've opened up in the chat window. I've just made a note that you're welcome to ask questions in there. So if you've got thoughts around what we're discussing and you just want to post them in the chat window, please do that. Or you can use the reactions button in the Zoom control to raise your hand, and then we can take a question that way, if that helps. I know one thing that comes up, and I don't know which of you would like to field it, is the question of, hey, if I give money as a company, if I donate some money or I become a longer-term contributor to NumFOCUS, what do I get? What's the point in doing that? So what is the high-level pitch behind that?
Katrina, maybe you might be able to speak to this.
Sure, I wasn't sure who wanted to pump it to.
Yeah, I was. We're all like waiting. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, obviously, corporations are not necessarily going to do, to give money with nothing in return, right? It's not out of the goodness of their heart that generally they give out money. But for sure, I think that there are a lot of different, advantages to adoption of open source, and also then giving back to the open source community, right? So first off, the idea that you're getting by using open source software, there's generally more adoption across other organizations, right? So you're able to take part in hiring and retaining talent that has all of these skills that are able to be transferred into your company, first off, right? Second off, you have sort of an industry standard that you're dealing with that is very easy for you to be able to contribute back to. The idea that if you do get involved and you support your developers being able to contribute to that, that you are part of the conversation, especially in tools that have wide adoption. On top of that, I think that it's really important for us to talk about the infrastructure aspect of open source. A lot of the projects that are in the PyData ecosystem, for example, NumPy, is a fundamental project that, hundreds and hundreds of other projects have spawned out of, right? I don't think it's necessarily it's not advantageous for us to let this project fail, right? So making sure that we have the governance, that we have the support, that we have the financial support in order to keep projects like this going are incredibly important to the success of your business on top of it, right? It's not just a matter of being able to say, hey, we're doing this really good thing for the community. There is a very real financial incentive for being able to attract, retain talent, and then also be in the situation where you are contributing to that infrastructure that will create more sustainability within your own organization as well. And so I think that there are other points that we can actually bring to the table here, but you know, I don't think that we can keep thinking of the open source community, especially not in this area, which has gotten so much adoption, as just being these projects that are out there. They're part of a much larger infrastructure that if it fails, we all kind of fail together. There are too many organizations that are reliant onto these projects for us to allow them to fail. And that's why I think that it's advantageous for them to keep giving and participate in the community.
James, how do you field that question? Oh, sorry, Leah, please.
No, that's okay. I was just going to add that you can easily go to our website and look up all the benefits of being a corporate sponsor. But one that I did definitely want to highlight is that for our gold and platinum corporate sponsors, they also get to participate in the NumFOCUS Advisory Council. And that's a very important group to us to provide support in the way of advice and insight and suggestions as a user on a corporate level. So I think that involvement in that, sitting at a table of other colleagues and folks in the community that are also sponsoring NumFOCUS, or we have actually still some of our founding board members on that council. And it provides a way to have a level of insight into NumFOCUS, into the services that we're providing for the projects, but also in just how that service is provided, how it may be able to be improved and delivered more efficiently. So it's a great way to get involved.
Perhaps, Leah, to add on to that, we can talk about one specific corporate sponsor. Two Sigma is an organization in the financial industry, and many organizations in the financial industry view open source as just a vendor they don't have to pay. They get the source code for free, but there's no checks that have to be written in order to do that. And they are organizations that oftentimes interact with vendors. And so they just see this as, free software in one sense of the term. Whereas an organization like Two Sigma, which is one of our corporate sponsors that sits on the advisory board, understands that the enormous amount of human effort that goes into creating tools like Jupyter, NumPy, and Pandas has saved that company enormous amounts of money from building those tools themselves. But the long-term sustainability of those tools requires giving back in one form or the other. Not necessarily just giving back money, but also participating in the governance, the evolution, the long-term development of these tools. So Two Sigma is a company where we have a number of core developers who both work for the company and are given just a little bit of their time as part of their main work to contribute back to the projects in the form of source code contributions. An organization that has even lent staff for certain administration and logistic functions to NumFOCUS in order to help NumFOCUS better modernize some of its systems. An organization that has had its staff help out with events just like PyData Global and to help run these fundraising events as part of their main duties. And it is the case that, and I don't want to say any names, but there was one NumFOCUS staff member who, actually there were two NumFOCUS staff members, two Sigma staff members who were part of the creation of this very event, PyData Global, last year. They were integral to the construction of a brand new event in a very uncertain time for NumFOCUS. They were allowed to take their work time in order to help to help support the open source community. And I understand that as part of their own internal promotion process, their contributions of this nature to open source were considered as part of their year-end review. And so it's an organization that has really internalized the idea of it's not just a vendor I don't have to pay, but part of a larger industry-wide movement that I am participating in.
I just want to add on to that I think there's also something that people need to take into consideration is the idea of when a package that you have reliance on and that's part of your code base doesn't make it, right? And you have all of these dependencies that are all stemming from this particular package that you've now incorporated into your ecosystem. once again, if there's no sustainability, there's no governance, there's no continuity as the project matures, there's a huge cost in replacing that, as either being able to, come in and, there's an opportunity cost as well as just the cost of development in order to move around this. And once again, a lot of these packages have become industry standard. So they're not the kinds of things that you can't avoid paying that cost at some point if you fail to maintain it.
Very good points. So we've spent 15, 20 minutes talking amongst the board here. It's probably time to open up to some questions and observations from others of you on the call here. I've posted a couple of questions in the chat and James has made some points. Please feel very free to use the chat. What will be useful in the chat is just to see which kind of companies or geographies are represented by you here. If you could make a note in the chat, that would be good. What I'm really after right now is some feedback from you. Why are you on the call? What do you want to learn? We can certainly dig some more into personal contribution into open source and why that might benefit me, the individual, and me, the corporate. But maybe you're here for other reasons. So we should dig into that and see which kind of questions need to be addressed. So for those of you, there's I don't know, easily half of you on the call, I don't recognize your names. What are you doing here? What are you looking to get out of this session?
Yeah, just to get things started, I wanted to talk a little bit about from a corporate perspective, like how contributing helps them. So other than being the co-chair for PyData Global this year, I'm also a partner at Python Anywhere. And one of the things we found very useful in establishing by contributing and establishing sort of like open connections and relationships with different open source projects is that not only is it sort of like hey, like if you start like delving into this library and like you want somebody to talk to, you know who to talk to, but also if even if like there's a certain feature that's missing and you desperately need it, then it's pretty useful to be able to know somebody there and say, hey, like get the convo started on, can we set up like a specific funding thing or grant thing to get this feature developed.
Connor, do you have any examples of those kind of features? Maybe Jupyter Hub editions, scikit-learn models?
So not in the NumFOCUS ecosystem, because for Python Anywhere, we're doing a lot more sort of server-side stuff. So I guess specifically, we've done something like this with Nginx before.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll jump off that point with our hosting for PyData London meetups via the Man Group in London, so in central London, hedge fund, large hedge fund, donating space over several years for 200 people every month attending. There's quite a cost behind that. And I asked the CTO at one point, hey, how many people have you hired from our ecosystem? He said, well, actually, Ian, it's none. I said, oh, crikey, that's a very small number. Why do you host us? He said, well, because the second order effect of hosting an event like this and open sourcing some of our core technologies, that's their time series, time tick database Arctic, is that quants and data engineers who wouldn't normally come to us because they like our open nature. It turns out some quants and some data engineers want to work with a more open-facing company rather than a closed financial services organization. So they found a recruitment benefit as a second-order benefit from hosting us. And that meant that they were happy to host us for years, and they will, post-pandemic, be continuing to be happy to host us. And so some of these soft benefits are hard to quantify, but they're clearly very powerful. That's a lot of investment that we get from the Man Group directed our way, which you can't point at a single person they hired, but nonetheless they're happy to keep on offering us that kind of support.
I'm curious, Ian and Katrina, do you ever find that organizations see themselves either at the forefront of the industry, changing how the industry moves, or being just responsive to how the industry has already moved? And as a consequence, participation in the open source community really does dictate whether they're a follower whether they're leading the pack, whether they're the ones who are at the whims of potentially even their competitors, or whether the ones who are setting the tone for, the industry as a whole.
Katrina?
Sure. I mean, there are actually several points that I can address in this area, right? Is the idea that, of course, some people really want to have a seat at the table, right? They're able to help direct where things are going, understand what's going on there, provide thought leadership, and put themselves out as being the industry standard. They're part of the conversation and kind of move in that direction. But I also think that there is the added benefit, and this is something that I've talked with our own HR departments, the idea that workers want to be on the forefront of technology, right? People actually leave jobs when they feel like they're not learning new skills or they're not moving forward in their careers. If they feel like they're stagnant, if they're working with old technologies, if they're not on the forefront of what's happening, they start to feel like they are becoming irrelevant and they will jump. They'll move to another company. They will not stay there. That things do have to move forward in order to be able to do that. And the cost of attrition, for sure, is one of the biggest costs that's always come up on my team. The idea that a worker is really not going to be a profit center for 2 years until they're on your team. It takes that long in order for people to get settled, to be able to move their project, to be able to put things into production and deploy, and all of those areas around that. Then you also have the cost of handing it off even after 2 years that they've become a profit center, right? So having people that are happy workers that feel like they're continuing to learn and grow is a really big benefit. And I do also want to mention that by having workers contribute to open source projects, they're able to get that immediate feedback from really, really experienced developers to tell them what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong. I always joke with people that when I was in graduate school, I didn't learn how to code in any of my classes. I learned how to code because I contributed to open source, and I had some of the most frank and talented developers giving me feedback real time on all of my, well, back then it was not pull requests, but you know what I mean. And so having that available is also providing that, one-upmanship in your own organization. The quality of your code is going to get better because you're receiving mentorship. There's a trade-off there. And that mentorship may not be available, or that thought leadership may not be available within your organization. So moving out into the community and helping it move forward is definitely a big win, I think, for corporations.
I was going to say, from like a individual perspective, like advancing your career, and from like a corporate hiring perspective, it is so great to see people being like significant open source contributors. Like such an easy test for whether they know what they're talking about and what they're doing or not. Interestingly, I've actually been working with some Python Ghana people and PyData Ghana people. They've been running some PyData workshops there, and we've been thinking about how to incorporate sort of open source contribution type stuff into a career certification thing, and then some of the different projects that I'm involved in could just directly hire from, like, oh, you're certified at this level, and so to make the hiring process much easier.
Katrina, I'm going to push back against one of your arguments about making your employees happier, because if your employees are happier and they're contributing, then they're visible and they could be poached, and nobody wants them to be poached. So we should put them in a corner and keep the lights off so that no one can see this talent that's otherwise shining in the corner. And of course, it's a stupid argument. It's a very bad argument. If someone wants to be poached, they're going to go and talk to a recruiter anyway. But some narrow-minded managers will see the negative and not see the positive. When I'm working at a strategic level with teams, I will certainly have a discussion with a manager who may say, so Ian, what kind of training could you bring in? What kind of training should we bring in to skill the team up in new processes and techniques? Well, we can do a review, but also you could contribute to an open source project, because if you go through a brutal review, a very polite and friendly and supportive, but nonetheless very hardcore review on a pull request, you're going to learn an awful lot about making sure your code is formatted correctly, you're following docstring conventions, you can write in a legible fashion and hold an argument, your code runs correctly. There's nice evidence around all of this. You've written a unit test, the unit test works. And then once you get past all of that, all of a sudden you can see that you can help somebody else, and then you can articulate to them why these skills are necessary. And if you bring any of that back into your team, all of a sudden you're skilling up the entire team. Some enlightened managers will say, that's a brilliant idea. This feels like free education. I can maybe encourage my people to do this over the weekend. Well, you could encourage them to do that, but maybe let them have a Friday afternoon to do this instead, and then share what they've learned and keep that inside the organization. And then some of those will adopt that. And I see there it works really quite nicely. But then the sell has to be, hey, go and get free education at some other contributor's expense, but do it under company time. So it's still, it's not quite a balanced argument, but it's a much more balanced argument than just take and never give anything back, because we should keep everyone high.
Yeah.
I guess I look at it that, people are going to jump ship regardless, right? If you're on a project and you do get poached, or most of the people in my field they're going to have recruiters after them all the time anyway. I can't tell you the number of recruiters who actually contact me on a daily basis. But if I'm in an organization that I feel, has the same values as I do and is keeping me happy and making it so that I'm continuing to learn, having that known versus the unknown is definitely a good thing. And then also, I think people really underestimate how there are a lot of companies, I think, that say that they're able to give time to work on open source that don't. And having worked from a lot of organizations that said that they're very happy to support, and then turns out that there is no actual support. Getting paid to do open source is definitely something a lot of open source developers are trying to do in their careers. And regardless of the money, regardless of the projects, regardless of the management structure or titles, they're going to be attracted to that. And so I think that it kind of just depends where your values are and what kind of organization really jives with what you're looking for in your life, right? But for sure, people are going to leave regardless. We're looking at about a 2.5-year tenure at most tech companies, regardless of who they are at this point. And so I think that we have to be realistic about what is the tour of duty somebody's going to do on your team, as opposed to what is the chance that they're going to stay there until they retire, because that's probably not going to happen. And so they're more likely, I think, to stay, in my opinion, if they are given all of these different opportunities in order to grow.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing to Ian. You were talking about the knowledge that's gained from allowing your employees or your team to be able to contribute to open source. And the other advantage to corporations that are doing this, or either supporting open source, is that knowledge can then be applied to projects that are incubated in a corporate setting. So if your company is has created their own open source tool, I think, James, you mentioned this at the beginning, but then being able to apply that knowledge to, you've contributed to another project and see those best practices and be able to apply them and see how that, that project that was incubated in your company can then grow and, eventually possibly move out as a community-driven project.
One thing I'll add is talking about this idea of giving people an opportunity for growth. PyData has, I think, served this purpose for a lot of people. If you really think about community organizing, it's an opportunity for you to take on a leadership role where you have to be very good at making people want to do the things that you need them to do, where the stakes are actually a little bit lower than, say, the fate of a company, although the fate of a conference are still pretty high stakes, but it's an opportunity for you to precociously introduce yourself into this idea of leadership before many organizations might actually officially promote you into that. And I have found that in many cases, people who make good community organizers, who make good community leaders, then make good leaders at their job. And much of what they learn from trying to work with volunteers can be directly applicable to working with their team members. Because, as I said, it really is a lot about setting a vision and getting people to want to do the things that you need them to do.
So I'd like to ask the wider question, or I'm going to ask a wider question around how have you on the call, how have you found introducing open source support, contributions, hiring via increased visibility from open source collaboration, how any of these topics have impacted you, hopefully positively. And whilst I'm asking that, also, Raman, you've noted that you work with governments in the US. I wonder if you have any particular points there around governmental interactions and open source and less enlightened viewpoints and their likelihood to contribute to a wider ecosystem as well. Is that something you'd be happy to talk about for a minute while other people think about their possible responses? I'm trying to elicit some responses from all of you here about your open source journey in corporations.
Yeah, gosh, it feels very remote. You know, it's been I always with my public sector clients, I'm trying to sort of bring them up toward more modern engineering practices. But I wish I could sort of say that I'm pulling them toward wanting to contribute to open source, but even getting them to use things like GitHub or know what you know, dependency management is sort of where the sort of boundary is. And so there's a little ways to go, but it would be great in 5 or 10 years to say that I'm pulling people into making pull requests to open source projects, but we're not there.
Okay, fair enough. Certainly, I know in the UK government, I've got many colleagues in London working under some of the data gov initiatives, which have strong, at least open source buy-in. I don't know how much contribution occurs the other side of that, but it's a nicely forward-thinking part of our government from a technology viewpoint. And of course, we've got our financial services industry here in London, which is very strong, which increasingly has been certainly adopting Python open source and open source in general due to reasons that James mentioned, but also beginning to increase their visibility and contributing back because they're seeing benefits of that, one of them being the hiring benefit. So everyone else on the call, how many of you have found benefits from introducing these conversations in your firm, or how many of you have resisted having these conversations because they feel like difficult ones? And what will be super useful is if you could switch on your cameras. It would be really nice to see some of you if that will be possible.
If they are reluctant to switch on their cameras, can they answer just in the chat?
And that's absolutely fine as well. I'm always, whenever I do remote training, reminding everyone, please turn on your cameras. Doing training to a bunch of blank screens is really hard work. I like to see smiling, happy faces. There we go. Camilla, hello there. Hello again. It's good to see you again. Jim, hello again. There we go. That's a bit better. Would anyone have an observation about introducing open source or a problem introducing open source to share?
I think there's one that Katrina can speak to specifically from her own professional experience. When you're introducing open source into any sort of government project, people are making a bet that the tool that exists today will be there in 10 years. And if it's not, they're going to have to take responsibility for it. And they've just added one more thing to their shoulders. I know, Katrina, you worked a lot with MEMAX, with DARPA, with these government contracts. And not being part of the story of something that you rely on, what does that mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So just so to kind of set the background, my background, I have worked with the US Navy, with the NSA, and with DARPA, like James has talked about. And within all of these agencies, there's for sure a reluctance to rely on open source depending on the movement of the code, right? So if you have a code base that is not likely to move, they don't care, because we can do a security review of the package and decide that it's A-okay, it's stable enough in order to make sure that it goes through the government acceptance testing, and then it goes into a release. And then, for example, it stays on a destroyer for the next 10 years and nobody ever touches it. If we do have to upgrade, though, if we have to move forward, we have to see whether or not that package is viable enough in order for us to continue development. For example, if the new DDGs come out, right, and we have new destroyers that suddenly we have to support, we have to make sure that we can take our old code base and then be able to use it in the new hardware, basically. And so we have a lot of problems around this, right? Because it's not just the security review. It's not just the government acceptance testing. It's also on top of that, making sure that we can justify doing this. And then on top of that, I do want to mention that there are some legal concerns that are involved there as well, just because there is the possibility that, and this, I don't think this has been a big problem or anything of either classified information or proprietary information or, corporate secrets. A lot of different things could end up slipping into open source projects. And so information or code moving in either direction is always something that people do worry about, right? But I think if you do have a security clearance, it's unlikely you're just going to say, oh, okay, I'm going to take this classified piece of code and I'm just going to slip it into this project because, hey, why not, right? But I do think that, and it's also very unlikely, I think, that people are going to adopt this project and then find that somebody acted in bad faith, that there was some sort of security hole, that there was some sort of, spy software or something that was put in there, right? But these are questions that come up. So working with the different organizations for sure can be a problem. And then also finding people who would be able to do that upgrade is also a problem. So having people in the community that can come in and have the knowledge to be able to come in and make those changes for them if they do decide to upgrade or they do decide to move forward on a new release. So there are a lot of considerations to take into account there. The MEMX project under DARPA for sure was much more forward thinking. The idea there was, in fact, to open source all of the tools that we were creating so that there was no barrier to entry for law enforcement agencies to be able to get access to our human trafficking tracking software. And so the idea there was that we did want to be out on the forefront. We did want to put new ideas out there. We did want to make sure that it was going to be something that was new. It was something that was no one had ever seen before. It was completely different from the commercially available software that was out there. And that's why it was funded by the government, right? Was so that they were able to put that kind of software out into the community. So my team was for sure involved in that in order to help guide that open source journey, if you will, for the idea of the government or a government agency actually releasing open source software and what that would mean and what it would look like.
Was it about having somebody who they could trust on the inside who can give them some guidance into a universe that's very different than their own?
Absolutely. There's a certain ethos, there's a certain, there's licensing considerations. There are all of these different pieces that they don't understand, or if they take responsibility for a package that they are putting out into the ecosystem, where do they put it? Who hosts it? Who maintains it? What does the governance of that look like? How do we make sure that this is something that is sustainable? It was a completely new world for them. So bringing in an open source team that had a lot of experience, all from the PyData ecosystem, I might add, everybody is a contributor on projects, to be able to advise and move that forward and package it and make sure that these were available and widely distributed, which they did get distributed all over the world to law enforcement agencies primarily. It was a very different experience for them. And for sure, there were a lot of questions, there was a lot of confusion. And so it was a really big undertaking for them. Not to mention it was something completely new. DARPA is not generally into sharing secrets. They don't, and that's not something that they're, it's our advanced defense area where we're trying to develop new things that, trying to get ahead in our R&D for everything that's on the horizon. It would be not advantageous to our government security in order to release those things prematurely. So this was a very, very different world for them.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. I like the idea of a governmental organization placing things into the open source community to ensure longevity. I mean, that's a very forward-thinking position, and it's not so hard now to point to Python and say, look at something like the TOB Language Popularity Index, where Python recently jumped from #3 most popular language on the planet to #1 most popular language on the planet, and say, look, the language will be around for a long time. It's been here for a long time. It's got a lot of people behind it. It's not disappearing. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense from a bet on open source. But it doesn't help us get more companies to contribute and support staff contributing. I wonder, Sanket and Camilla, as chairs, you are both chairs, right, for PyData Global. That is your role, along with Conrad and one other, and you're representing 2 different continents. Camilla, you're based in Germany, and Sanket, you're in India. How are you finding? How do you find in your commercial organizations the relationship with open source and, say, easing hiring? Because you've shared something or you've collaborated in some way, there can be an argument. It's easier to hire the right kind of people, and maybe that's a good argument or an argument that falls on deaf ears. I'm curious, what have been your observations?
Yeah, I think I have an example with me, which I can share with everyone here. So I think this story goes back to 2018, when I started working with the government of India on a ballistics project with forensics government. So just to let you know that Indian government is not too much into technology. There are still some offices in India where they use Windows XP and Windows 7. So they are not technologically advanced. So I was basically chosen out of a hackathon along with my team to develop a project which would basically match the bullets that were recovered from the crime scene, and to check if the different bullets at the different crime scene were fired from the same firearm. So basically, every bullet fired from a same firearm leave some scratches on the bullet and the shell, which are unique to every firearm. So that's basically kind of like a fingerprint, like a human fingerprint. So basically, when I was, brought in for the project, I saw the environment over in the forensics lab. So everybody so basically there are different levels in forensics lab, like audiovisual, human DNA and stuff like that. And they were all using proprietary software for which they were paying like thousands of dollars for a year for their license and all. So I was basically brought in to develop the forensics software for bullet matching using all the open source software and tools. And it took me 2 years along with my team, and we did it. So that was basically kind of setting an example that stuff could be done using, like, good stuff can be built using open source. You don't need to pay like thousands of dollars to, have, I don't know, maybe good software. So yeah, I think that was the story, and which kind of like sets like a example for the whole. I'm in Delhi, which is like the capital state of India, which so everybody was really amazed. And when we pitched the software to the director of the lab, they were like really impressed that we did all this without spending any money from their whole fund which they receive from the central government. So yeah, I think that was my take on the Ian's question.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're nearing the end of the discussion time that we have here. Do we have any other questions that ought to be addressed from people in the audience? And it could be a question or an observation, or you might be curious about ways that you could try to get your company, your team, to sign off on contributing back, which could be person power, that could be sponsoring a conference, it could be giving support to NumFOCUS, or it could be something else. But if we've got any of those questions, now is absolutely the right time to flush those out. So I'm just going to pause for a minute and see if anyone has any of those questions. And if we don't, then maybe Leah and James, it'll be time to summarize ways that companies can get involved, just to seed some of that thinking for next week's conference. So does anyone have any questions around getting more involved that we might discuss now?
One observation back when I worked in corporate was there's the sort of like open bureaucratic hostility to the entire idea. It was just like constantly there. I mean, you'd have these stories of people trying their best to do it, and it resulted in some like ethics investigation, and then that was like totally pointless, and then they would leave to another company. That happened to one of my friends when they just tried to do anything out in the open, because the culture is so built around proprietary that it's like almost unthinkable to imagine doing something like making a Git commit with your corporate email address, right? So I don't know what to do about that. So I just quit my day job and sort of decided to like make my living the hard way. That was my solution. But I don't know. But that wasn't completely my experience of the large private sector when it comes to open source.
Right. So I take, I mean, I totally hear you on that. And I've had a number of these conversations with my clients, and the number of times a boss says, it's brilliant, we're going to hire down the line more efficiently if I let some of our staff spend some time committing to the open source community. It's a very small number of conversations that have worked my way there. I do keep trying. I'm very, very optimistic, but it's difficult to get sign off there. And I take the conversations the other way. So on my mailing list, I've got a newsletter. I share my thoughts. People ask me, hey, Ian, you've got jobs on here. How do I increase my chance of getting a new job? I said, well, one of the things you can do is contribute to open source, because when you then go and apply to a job, and you can show that I've made a contribution, which could be as simple as I wrote a bug fix. So I wrote a bug or a bug fix or a docstring fix, or even I contributed some code of material value to a project. But any of those steps mean that I can demonstrate that I can communicate clearly, I can have a conversation, I can put forward a decent argument, and I can get something shipped. And I can't do that with my work because my work's all private, but with a public contribution, which I could do in my spare time, or maybe I could do under the radar in the office, because maybe if I'm giving a bug fix for a project on a docstring, legal aren't going to care. No one's actually going to care. I could just do it in the office, taking a better to ask forgiveness than permission viewpoint on something that's totally not connected with the organization. So there's no reason why anyone would actually push back. And hey, if you're looking for a job, maybe you should just crack on and do this anyway. And so enlightened individuals will take that argument and then begin to make some contributions back. And possibly they're contributing to a project, and I'll point people this way, contribute to a project where one of the lead developers is in the company that you're interested in, because all of a sudden you can just avoid HR in the recruitment process at that point and have a very sensible conversation with someone who can see your work and cares about the project. And then you've got a one-on-one conversation with someone who's got the ability to give the nod to you to get you in for an interview. So going around that route can help. And then that benefits the companies that do support the open source initiatives, because they get the nice candidates, the smart, switched on, motivated candidates coming that way. It doesn't help, motivate the non-switched on organizations, except that they face the continual drought of good talent. And at some point, slowly, the penny will drop that they really should do something about this. And in the meantime, the likes of 2 Sigma and other organizations that fund PyData are very visible, and they get a great screaming pile of new good talent coming at them because it's a nice place to work. It's a good, supportive, clear, good environment to work in. So that's the argument that I always take. I tried this with companies, but when that fails, I just remind the individuals, hey, it's in your best interest to get some of these commits out there. It will serve you well in the long term. And that often motivates people.
Ian, I'm sure you've had this experience, and maybe you could share this with us to help motivate the scale of engagement. Here's the scenario that I have seen before. You're using some tool, Jupyter or scikit-learn. It's part of your core business. Because it's part of your core business, when you run into a bug, you have no choice but to fix it. If that is a bug, which is a very trivial bug and it's a one-line change, you might go to GitHub and you might submit a pull request. But if your engagement with the open source community is limited to just that one drive-by commit, it can be very hard for that to actually be accepted by the core developers, who might get to it a week later, who might get to it a month later, might be working on something else that's a refactoring. And the drive-by commit just doesn't necessarily go anywhere, even if it's very small. As a consequence, you start to absorb responsibility that really shouldn't be yours, responsibility over these core tools that you have to maintain, and you start to lose the benefit of open source because you're diverging from those code bases. And even if you had integrated with the open source community in a very small way, just tell the project, hey, I'm at big company and I use your project, it would make it easier when you have to have those very small contributions to actually integrate it into the process, to actually see that happen, so that you no longer are in this position where you're absorbing responsibility over time to satisfy your business use cases, but you're actually have an open dialogue with the projects to go back and forth. You ever seen that, Ian?
I've certainly seen companies fork a copy of the code and edit it locally, and then absorb it as another sunk cost on the project. And I think the mistake there is to not account for the fact that there is this additional cost, as you say, on the project, which somebody has to support. And there's a dollar value you can put against that as a bit of, as a tax, some friction against your team moving forwards. And the enlightened individuals in the company will see that, but the bosses won't necessarily understand or care about that. And part of the assumption will be, hey, that bug gets fixed later. We'll just upgrade later on when it's been fixed by somebody else. So I find, yeah, I see that, and I don't know what the right argument to use there is to convince anyone, except to get the enlightened individuals to not ask permission in the first place, and just to go and file a nice bug report that happens to contain a fix inside it, and then just push it out there, which that doesn't solve the culture problem in an organization, but it does at least ship some of those fixes so that somebody else can integrate them over time. Anyone else seen any better examples of that working, actually motivating change?
I was just going to say that actually in one of the organizations that I did work in, we did have a no open source policy. You could in fact be let go from your job if you were ever caught contributing to open source. And I'm not going to name the organization, but I'm also not going to say that I didn't give patches to other people that may have contributed them under their own names. But I'm not suggesting you do that, because there was actually just recently a court case around that, which was a little bit scary. But anyway, what I did want to mention is that this organization, we ran into exactly that problem. The idea that we had packages that were relatively new that became dependencies in a rather large code base that was a multi-million-dollar project. And suddenly we were in the position where what would happen, we would create bug fixes or we would put new features in there, and then we would put them into an internal repository within the company that was not shared anywhere. And we ran into the problem very, very quickly where we were out of sync with everything that was going on absolutely everywhere. I'll just put it that way. And there really was the cost of being able to contribute that back is nothing, right? However, the cost of fixing this problem was huge. I mean, just an unbelievably huge problem. And so developer time, once again, just the cost of downtime, the cost of, bugs on production systems, all sorts of things like that, because, the skills that we're hiring for within the team are not necessarily the same skills as library developers. And so having people who are able to maintain a library, have never done it before, it's a bad idea. I'll just put it that way. And so for sure, I've seen that happen. And so it quickly became very apparent that we needed to have some sort of open source policy. There was just no question about it whatsoever. And then I do want to mention also that it is from a leadership level, I can tell you that I have these conversations all the time, by the way, where I'm talking to leadership. And a lot of times also I get to be the decision maker. So it's very easy for me to say, hey, this is our policy. This is what we're going to do. And I can open it up and I can offer people 20% time and all of these different things in order to work on open source. Not every organization is going to be okay with that, right? And you can give all of these different reasons. You can go on and on and on. There's not one organization that I've worked with, except for that one, that you can't do it in your own time. But for sure, it sometimes can be a very hard sell. And there's all of the problems with, the legality, not wanting to be associated with a project, not feeling like they have any responsibility, not opening the floodgates that suddenly they make an exception for this one bug fix and suddenly they have this huge tsunami of projects and responsibilities that are suddenly on their shoulders. Frankly, I think that's a kind of a crazy idea that suddenly everyone would look to you to be the developers for everything. But at the same time, it depends. And I think that this is part of the thing that I really struggle with as somebody who did go more in the corporate route, at least for now, is that the idea that you want to be able to affect change. That's one of the reasons I wanted to go into that kind of leadership, was that I could affect change and be the decision maker in that area. but then also running into roadblocks there. And I think it's important to have more people in the community that are moving in that direction, to be quite honest, that demand that when they're taking jobs. If they have the skills and they're the people that people want to hire, that, you know, that's part of the deal, that you bring in a leader that you know is going to be involved in this kind of community. And so, you know, infiltrating from within, I think, is also a very good idea, because what I think ends up happening a lot of times is that we have open source developers that end up creating their own consulting companies, or they go off and kind of do their own thing. And then it's harder, you know, it's harder to affect that change within an organization, but it is a balance. And it's also kind of, you know, how much can you take? Like, how dogged can you be? You know, maintaining that motivation to keep pushing for an agenda.
Ian, shall we move to our final thoughts, our final comments?
Absolutely. I think, yes, James and Leah, any closing comments about companies and individuals getting involved in NumFOCUS?
So perhaps we can go in reverse order: Leah, then Ian, then Katrina, then myself, and then Conrad can close us out.
Yeah, I'd be happy to go. Yeah, so I would just like to invite everyone to get involved. I was just getting ready to add a couple links in the chat, links to pages on our website that give you some more information on whether that is making a financial contribution, encouraging your company to make a financial contribution, or become a NumFOCUS sponsor. And if you want to do that, please reach out and we will help you with those conversations. But there are also other ways to get involved. NumFOCUS is really increasing our community involvement through several committees, and we've got affiliated project selection committee, where we now have a community-led committee that is helping review applications for our affiliated projects and through small development grants. And our DISC committee is getting ready to open up nominations for that involvement. That's our DEI initiative. So there's lots of ways to get involved. Please go to the website, research, or if you want additional information or you're not finding information, happy to answer those questions. You can reach me at leah@numfocus.org.
Okay, and for me, the wrap up is easy. One thing I found that works quite well is a company's motivation to hire. So when a company is motivated to hire, have them think about contributing, which could be a talk at a community event or a conference, or sponsoring a conference. That's been a strong motivator in PyData London with larger organizations. Get them to point their wallets towards sponsoring in some shape or form. And then that tends to work pretty well. And that brings, of course, support into our community where it can be directed to long-term support for the projects. So that'll be my closing note. Katrina?
Yeah, so all of that, and I just want to add to this that a couple of things I do want to mention. I was just talking to my team today about getting involved in projects, and that sometimes people find that barrier to entry a little bit high. And so one of my big suggestions I always offer people if they do want to get involved in projects is to make pull requests on documentation. That is a really good way to get involved, because there's never enough documentation on projects, and it's a great way to get familiar with a project, learn the people who are on the project, and start becoming a part of the community. And that's a very direct way that people, you know, contributors can get involved. And then on top of that, I do want to mention that within companies that a lot of support, you'd be surprised what the voices of people on teams, even, you know, independent or individual contributors within organizations, pushing up from the bottom in order to be able to affect change, and being able to ask for support and putting people in touch with the right people so that we can talk about, you know, corporate sponsorships and PyData sponsorships and all those things. You know, all of the offices that we work with in order to solicit, you know, donations. These people change all the time, or there might be some other person we can talk to, or there's another, you know, division we can talk to, and things like that in order to help track down these funds. And then the last thing I do want to mention is the need, I think, for us to acknowledge that we do need money in our unrestricted funds. that was one in particular that I think that we should be pushing right now as a community, because this does go, it's great to earmark funds for particular projects. Fantastic. It's wonderful. But then all the other projects and all of the other new initiatives that we're able to fund and be able to help grow is really important. So giving directly to NumFOCUS to allow us to distribute those funds is incredibly important and would be very much appreciated any way that you can help.
And my final comment would be that giving back to the open source community, participating in NumFOCUS, is about being a part of the conversation. This can occur at many scopes and many scales. It can start with giving money to NumFOCUS or donating staff time to NumFOCUS. It can be as small as participating in an event, helping to volunteer for an event. It can be as small as telling the projects that you use, hey, we're using your tool and it's a great tool. Anything that you can do to be a part of the conversation, to be a part of the open development of these tools, helps benefit these tools in one way or the other. And it is in your best interest to be a part of NumFOCUS in whatever fashion you choose, either to help be an industry leader and to lead the direction of these software tools for your industry, or to be able to service your own needs for these projects by letting the project know, I use your tool, I love it, but could you also do this? Or I use your tool and I have this little fix, could you help me just make sure that this gets in? Whatever the case may be, there is a benefit to be had at whatever scale that you contribute to the open source community, and it really behooves you to be a bigger part of this. And so if you are interested in any of these ideas and getting involved in whatever fashion or getting more involved, please feel free to reach out to me, to Katrina, to Ian, or to Leah. We'll share our contact details in the Zoom chat. And Conrad, hopefully we'll also have an opportunity to share with the attendees after the fact any final details we have. But otherwise, you can always email, I believe it's info@numfocus.org, to reach the NumFOCUS switchboard, or tweet at us at NumFOCUS on Twitter. Thanks everyone for joining, and I'll hand it over to Conrad to close us out.
Cool. Thank you. Just from like the current macro perspective, it's been increasingly hard to find good talent across the world. It's only going to be increasingly harder. And so I think it's very important for companies to be able to provide their staff with the ability to, the feeling that they're doing something meaningful, and also just provide them with the ability to keep the edge, right, by contributing to open source projects and being the most updated with all the newest open source stuff. Thank you everyone for joining. I'm sure we all had like a very interesting convo, and we'll hope to see you at the rest of the conference.
And I'm going to say thank you again to Conrad, because it's 5 a.m. for you. You're doing a crazy good job there out in Hong Kong. Thank you very much for staying up so late to run these expert briefing sessions today, and for your work on Monday running them as well. It's been a great first experiment. I hope we can repeat these for future conferences.